Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's conversation. I'm Leslie Walker for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you and introducing our panelists for tonight's conversation about how hip hop has impacted and even influenced corporate branding. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Naima Cochrane, who is a contributing writer for Vibe magazine and the creator of Music Sermon on Instagram. Music Sermon is a series highlighting the underappreciated and often overlooked artists, songs, and subgenres of urban music. Our panelists include Nicole Plantin, who is a general manager at Collabo Music. Nicole is an experienced A&R professional, having worked for Rostrum and Electrica Records. We have Bill Stephney, who is the former president of Def Jam and co-founder of Public Enemy. Bill is currently the executive of Broad Market Media. Gabriel Tolliver, who is a multimedia journalist and co-author of Bling, the hip hop jewelry book, and C. Keith Harrison, professor of the College of Business and director of hip hop innovation and business program at the University of Central Florida. Doc Harrison and all of our panelists are big advocates for hip hop education and enterprise, and I now turn it over to Naima.
Thank you, Leslie. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge and give a tribute, acknowledge the fact that the Black music community and culture community, and especially the Black journalism community, lost a great, Mr. Greg Tate, who was one of the voices who helped bring hip hop to mainstream, which is one of the things that we're about to talk about today. Longtime columnist for the Village Voice, and also author of a book that's relevant to tonight's conversation, Everything But the Burden, which was about the commodification of hip hop and cultural appropriation. If you haven't read it, if you don't know who he is, if you haven't heard of him, please do a little digging. It's well worth your time. Your favorite writer was inspired to write by Greg Tate. So having said that, first of all, thank you everybody for being here. Um, let's dig into it a little bit. We're here in part because of the music anthology that the Smithsonian curated that's covering hip hop's entire history, which is now almost 50 years old. We're only about 3 years out from that. But if we're being honest, the tipping point in hip hop's story and the story of the culture, which is now the biggest music genre in the world, comes when brands and corporations and companies and mainstream outlets start paying attention to us. So let's say that's about the 90s, give or take early 90s, right? And it both helped us get here, right? Never thought that hip hop could take it this far. Branding, liquor, fashion, licensing, food, shoes, clothing, uh, everything, and business owners, etc. But also, there's an argument that it's distilled the original four pillars of the culture, and if the culture belongs to everybody, does it belong to anybody? So, Mr. Stephanie, Bill, first of all, an honor. But I want to start with you
Please call
because
me Bill, by the way.
okay, Bill. I want to start with you because I think PE's journey, and your journey specifically. I mean, you've watched this evolution from the front and in the middle of it. Um, just in general, like, what are your thoughts on how much we had to kind of, because there's this line between us having wanted people to accept us, we wanted Nike to give us a deal, we wanted whatever, but then the flip side of that is like we're kind of giving up a little bit of ourselves at the same time, meaning the culture. What have been your thoughts on this? You've seen it evolve so greatly over time. In PE, I feel like it's such a solid brand as a band. Like, everybody knows the PE logo.
Yeah, good questions. There's the old saying, be careful what you wish for, you might get it. And the culture and the industry have, achieved, I think, many of the wants and desires that, you probably heard back, in the first records, hotel, motel, Holiday Inn, so the first, ostensibly the first hit hip hop record is endorsing the Holiday Inn. So over the course of the past 40 to 50 years, I think we've achieved, what many of us, at least at the outset, and I admittedly come from the AARP end of the hip hop nation at this point. And I was into this before it was called hip hop, when it was just DJs and people called it b-boying and that sort of thing. So to go from culture, a music, a scene coming up largely in Harlem, the Bronx, New York City area, of just young people looking really to party, and to see that transform into multi-billions of dollars of cultural and economic value decades later. um you know I, I I guess it's hard to figure out where the good and where the bad is, because none of this was really planned. It really sort of developed its own direction and its own pathway.
Thank you for that. And I think that is the part, right? Like it really is. I just quoted Big's line already. Never thought that hip hop could take it this far, but that's a real thing. Nobody knew how big this could get. That hip hop would be this. We had no idea. Even I don't even think in the early '90s we knew yet. Um, Alan, you and Reggie Osei, who I miss dearly, wrote a book about bling, the jewelry of hip hop, um, which kind of brings us to that. We go through the kind of MC b-boy movement when it's really kind of about the art form and aesthetic. Then we get into like a conscious movement when we're thinking about the lyrics and the storytelling. And then hip hop starts making money for real, right? And we're not talking about what we would do. Now we're talking about what we are doing. And we get into the bling, shiny suit, Jacob the jeweler, Jesus piece, iced out wrist. We get to that. Talk to us about that point in the game.
Well, I think bling has always been with us. It's just about how we, what we called it. Because we look back in the recorded time of humankind. It was feathers, rocks, ornamentation, and then the evolution into precious minerals, and then the creation of jewelry. So I think as this ornamentation evolved and it found its way into hip hop culture, it is a celebration in particular of the good life, and repping this mythology of the American dream, of making it. You've arrived, large and in charge. Look at the ice on my wrist, on my neck, on my teeth. And I just really think it's an expression of arrival, or perceived arrival, for a lot of these hip hop artists. And then we see it permeating in like other things like cars, products, and everything else. So bling is like the celebration of a perceived good life.
Right. Nicole, you and I both came into the game like the height of the party era, when there was a lot of money. A lot of money. There's a lot of money in the music business still. But now as your career has evolved and you're on, you're helping grow careers, and you're fighting to get things heard, and you're watching, music evolve, especially over the last, 10 to 15 years. What are your thoughts on kind of how hip hop has grown and changed, and the fact that we're now, again, the biggest, it's now the biggest music genre?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for Leslie. Thank you to Leslie for inviting me and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. This is a big deal. So thank you. Also, yeah, I mean, I have been, witness to the period of time where, everything was aspirational. It was about access, and to a world that typically doesn't invite us, or doesn't open its doors to us. It was about, getting in and knocking down doors. And I think that in general, the industry has evolved as a result of, technology, innovation. The playing field, I think, has been leveled. There's been a democratization in general where, there's a relationship that artists can develop directly with their fans. And so, instead of having to look outward or having to look at, corporations and other people to stamp you or to give you access, you're able to build your value on your own. And so I think that times are different. Artists are now feeling like they have the ability to just have more ownership now, and to dictate their own terms. It's not just about, being accepted into, another world or needing to have, be financially backed by other people. Artists are now in a position where they're able to, build their own businesses. And so I think, it's been interesting to see the evolution. It's the evolution that has come about as a result of how big hip hop has become, and I think that that's the positive. I think, yeah, there's definitely a conflict, in terms of how we feel about how hip hop is shared, in or how corporations decide they want to include the culture or represent the culture. But I think that this is the positive, is that we're at a point right now where artists, there's just an ability to have ownership. And it's really changed the landscape. I think that there's more room for more voices and more perspectives from artists now, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. So professor, doctor, should I call you Keith, doctor, or professor? What do you prefer?
That's a tough one. You can call me Prof. Yeah.
Prof. Okay. So Prof, from a historical standpoint, from a scholarly standpoint, when hip hop started, it was the voice of the unheard. It was, literally scraping things together to create sound, and kind of starting from scraps and kind of like no, y'all are gonna see me, y'all are gonna hear me type state of mind. And now again, there's so many artists, there's subgenres. We have legacy artists, we have new artists, we have people in the middle, we have poppy rap, we still have backpack rap, we have a little bit of all of it, right? And there is no area of world culture, right? Like whether it's the US or anywhere else, from everything you can think of, again, any kind of consumer goods, any kind of media, anything that somehow hip hop hasn't touched in some way. But we've also gotten very far away from, DJs, b-boys, MCs, and graffiti. So from your standpoint, looking at it from a scholarly place, what have we gained and what have we lost? And I know that's a very broad question, so I mean you can kind of keep it concise, but are we too far gone from where hip hop started?
Naima, that's a dissertation. I love your question. So what I'm going to do, and I'm just honored to be here. I want to thank Leslie, African American Museum, Culture, and Smithsonian. So I'm going to read a quote to frame what we've gained and lost. It's from Nas's Carry On Tradition, which was the title of my project as a Nasir Fellow a year ago this fall, when I was on sabbatical and lived even in COVID near Cambridge. And, I've been examining their lyrics and what they tell us about innovation, entrepreneurship, and other themes. So there's this slice, what does he say? He talks about how it's blown up, and then he says from Carry On Tradition, Nas says, "We used to be a ghetto secret, can't make my mind up if I want the whole world to peep it. And so I think that's the nexus of your great question. What have we gained? I mean, we've gained access. And I want to back up historically, particularly with Black Americans, African Americans. When enslaved, we were always creative, you know, whether it was a cotton gin and inventions throughout. But in terms of cultural appropriation, things were co-opted. We weren't given credit. You know, just as an aside, I have a project now where I'm helping golf communities and restaurants in Central Florida educate them on that the first person that invented the golf tee is Dr. George Grant, an African-American male, the first Black faculty on a dental, he was in a dental school at Harvard. I'm using that as a context to, we get left out that we even created this. I mean, you look at commercials now, the DJs, the themes, you might not even see someone Black and brown, which isn't negative or positive, but it's something we lost, where people do not know who were the originators of this. So, you know, the way I think about it, Naima, is from underground, from urban underground to marginalized to crossover to mainstream to commercialized to hyper commercialized to whatever's next, is what we've lost is, and I'm going to speak as a Gen Xer, early 50s, you know, we've lost the backyard parties, the cassette tapes when you had to dub it. We've lost some of the genesis, I would say. But at the same time, as an academic who, you know, created a certificate on the business of hip hop innovation, I think there's benefits to institutionalizing hip hop culture. Hope I answered it.
You did. No, and it was a great segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which was the entrepreneurial spirit of hip hop, right? And I think that hip hop was uniquely poised to be this, to be such an entrepreneurial genre and culture, because I mean, let's just be honest, it comes from the streets. You know, it was. I tell people sometimes, like, no, there were a lot of hustlers in the early hip hop who used it as an opportunity to go legit. Because as Eazy said, if you can sell drugs, you can sell CDs. But at the same time, I think that and I'm going to speak as though hip hop is a community we're all part of, because it is. I think we're unique in that I can't think of another genre that is, you know, as driven in its messaging and its subject matter, and has been consistently. Hip hop still acts hungry. Hip hop still acts young, even at 50 years old, right? But that's that double-sided coin again, right? Because we are also, it started aspirational, but it was very much about, this is what I got, or this is what I'm gonna get. This is what I wear. This is what I own. And now it's, you know, this is what I run. These are all the businesses I have. And there are two sides of the argument. One is, okay, this is great that Jay is a billionaire, but now Jay is part of the capitalist problem. You know, it's great that Puff is the great Gatsby, but now, you know, what does that mean for the people who aren't? And so hip hop was originally a, like, get it and bring your friends along with you mentality, which was part of the entrepreneurial spirit. But now that attitude seems to be shifting. And as to Nicole's point, artists are coming into a space of their own ownership and control a little bit more. I want to talk about that. Is the entrepreneurial spirit of hip hop changing a little bit in terms of what our intentions are? Because now we're talking about owning masters, which is great, but all of it is still about getting money at the end of the day, even if we pretend it's not. So we went from talking about, you know, let me get these checks from the major label for these shows, whatever, to now it's like, give me my masters. But it's still all about earning money off of the talent and the culture at the end of the day. Gabriel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, we live in a psychotic capitalistic society that, you know, it is, for many, it's about the dollar and the attainment of the dollar. And at the same time, unfortunately, a lot of times it's never enough. I mean, we see that on Wall Street. We see it with like the CEOs and their big salaries and stuff like that. And, we see it in social media, flashing the latest bag and, stacks and, bands of money and stuff like that. So I think we have this like hyper consumer pathology, and, hip hop at this stage of the game, I think a large part of it is about that. It is purely about getting paid and showing everybody, how much that you're rocking with. And we have also unfortunately seen the negative aspects of that with, deaths of, people like Young Dolph and, Nipsey and Pop Smoke, who were, trying to do things with their, entrepreneurial spirit in a positive way. And then, being cut down tragically because of haters, because they got it and, other folks don't. So I do think it's a little bit out of balance right now. And yeah, hopefully it will run its course and get back to some type of balance where it is continuing to be a music message of, social relevancy that has, some more positive impacts beyond just, getting that cash and, flashing the bling and all the things that come with it.
Nicole, when you talk to new artists now, and I think every new artist now comes into the game at least asking about owning their IP and brand deals and things that you didn't hear come up until much later back in the day. What do you hear them saying is their long-term goals, thought process, if they have them yet, right? Are they kind of saying, I want these things because that's what they're seeing people talk about and they think that's what they're supposed to do? Or is it like, I have a plan on how I'm going to flip this?
Yeah, well, artists these days are coming in way more informed than they ever have. They have access to tons of information. They're learning about how other people have succeeded, how other people, how, other businesses have how other artists, how their peers have been able to get their, careers and businesses off the ground and become successful. So, you're definitely dealing with a more informed artist at this point now in terms of how realistic some of their expectations are or what they think, is entailed in actually achieving some of what they want to achieve. That's, some of the challenge that's can be difficult to kind of get them to just have a realistic, idea of exactly what it takes to be the people that they look up to, the Jay-Z's and, the different artists out there who have been able to do more, kind of turn their careers into multi-platform or multimedia businesses, So it's, it's really about, with artists, understanding or finding out what their long-term goals are, and getting an understanding of what's important to them. Do you want, not all artists are, I mean, Jay-Z was clear, right? He said, what did he say? I'm a business. I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. Right. And
Mm.
so he knew what he was coming in to the business to do and to achieve. Not all artists are business minded, so, you have a variety, but what I will say is that, artists have more options now. They're aware of what the options are. They're way more informed, and yeah, so you're just dealing with the deals are different. If artists are actually able to come into into the conversation with leverage now as opposed to before, because they might have already built audiences. They might already have careers, and so at this point they're looking at labels and they're, it's more of, okay, well, what can you do for me that I can't do for myself? And so, almost to the point where you have to almost convince them of why they might need label support.
Well, I want to stop you there because I want to transition over to Bill with that. Bill, the label system is completely different now than it was even a decade ago. Definitely completely different than it was 20 years ago. So, 30 years ago, I can't even imagine. Is it still something that artists need?
I think consistent with the conversation, it depends. It depends on the goals of the artist. When I would have my A&R meetings with talent coming in, I would specifically ask them, why do you want to do this? Are you doing it for money? Are you doing it for an artistic statement? Are you doing it for social impact purposes? Are you doing it for self-esteem? Why? What? So at that point, once you ascertain and determine what the goal is of the artist, you sort of direct their career and the development of their career appropriately to what their goals are. And sometimes those goals can conflict. Sometimes they are aligned. It really depends. So for an artist who wants to become Drake, wants to become Cardi, you probably do need a label to scale and to tap into the expertise of executives and structure who've done it before, repetition. For an artist who might be looking to become socially impactful, or simply they want someone to hear their art, you probably don't need a label. You can upload to anything from TikTok to SoundCloud to YouTube to Instagram, to all of these platforms that we didn't have certainly 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. You can do that on your own. So if your goals are such where they can be accomplished by tools that you can access, you don't need a label.
Right. Thank you for that. I have a follow-up question, but I'm gonna wait because I'm gonna give you a pause. Prof, I'm coming. Yes, for you, but I'm gonna go to Prof and I'm gonna come back.
Okay.
Prof, so I talked at the top of the show about how branding and commodification of the culture was necessary for the culture to grow, obviously, and to expand beyond the immediate communities and neighborhoods and Black people. And I shouldn't just say Black people because there are more Black people involved in the creation of hip hop, and that's another thing we'll come back to. But at the same time, now we're at a point again where hip hop is pop, right? So it's in everything: sports, media, food, furniture, literally everything. We don't use the term sellout anymore, but is there a need for us to hold some things back for cultural preservation?
Just another slam dunk question. Here's how I'll answer it, Naima. I would encourage everyone just to go to Amazon.com and put in hip hop products. Regardless of your generation, it will blow your mind. From children's books to, you name the product. And so my question is, with cultural preservation, who owns it?
The question now, right? Because it's pop, right? So once it's popular culture, who owns the culture?
Yes. So I co-teach a class with Reggie Saunders, the Jordan brand, who, those that know Reggie, he signed DJ Khaled and Travis Scott. He always looks at the intersection. So one of the lectures we do is called Hip Hop, and Hip Not. And during the hip not part, I have a gift a friend of mine gave me from the DMV area many years ago. Um, it's the wrapping bunny and then the Christmas bunny, and it's just the worst co-optation in my view, which I've been listening, comes up when I fall in love, 1979, 80. After I did my homework, Southern Cal, Guardian and Cerritos, playing Odyssey, which is the competitor of Atari, listening to Rapper's Delight. So beyond my scholarship, just living the culture, it's just the worst thing on earth. And there's no gatekeeping like we have in the peer review process about that cultural production. So I'm just, at least once a week, I just log on to Amazon, and some of the stuff I collect, I mean, I enjoy the salt and pepper shakers but I just hope salt and pepper are benefiting from that. And I want to
Yo, the way I'm about to go get salt and pepper shakers.
Oh, it's dope. It's dope. I mean, you just hit me up.
I want to buy them immediately.
Yeah, no. And so what I want to say is, back to the first round related to this, colleague of mine, known him since 7th grade, Sean Willis, played college football at Colorado State. He's getting his doctorate of business administration, and I've been a sounding board for him. I'm not on his committee, but he's looking at corporations like Geico, where we see, DJ Khaled teaching someone, a white American male, how to brush his teeth through the hard work and value system of hip hop, to tag team, who now is blown up even more since '93. And real quick, and then Salt and Pepper, push it real good. I don't have a problem with those things if folks know the historical context. But anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, but I do want to put a pin. Everybody who's watching at home, put a pin in the word context. We're going to come back to that. It's very important. Okay, I'm going back to you. Now, this question is for everybody, but I'm going to go to Bill first. Because one of the things I think that, consumers also have way more knowledge than lay people used to back in the day because of the internet. But it's hard sometimes to separate what's real versus what you think is real. And, obviously things are never as simple as they seem, but what they're hearing mostly is the artist's voice, because the executives can't speak up but so much, or they'll get fired. So my question to you is, how real is Industry Rule 4080?
Your record, are shady. Yes, there are shady folks in the record industry and the music industry, and I don't think that's an incredible revelation. But and this goes to what I've tried to be to folks that I've worked with. You counter that shadiness with your own education. There are a ton of books, and now with the internet, forget it. When folks were accusing record companies of being shady, the incredible, and may he rest in peace, composer, producer, singer, artist, talent, Kashif, wrote a book about the music business. There were books previous to the ones that Kashif wrote, Alan Siegel, some of the others. So if you walk out of that meeting, at blank, blank, blank label or company, feeling that you encountered a shady enterprise or person, you counter that with your own education. You step your game up. You don't run to the club. So you then come back with the knowledge of the business, of the industry, in order to minimize the shadiness and its negative impact on your career. And we've seen that with Jay-Z, we've seen that with Puffy, we've seen that with Andre Harrell. Going back, we've seen it with a whole bunch of folks who said, all right, let me figure this game out and let me translate my skills from it being a game to an actual business and industry.
And I'm glad you said that last part, because that's what I do, try to remind people, like, it's a music business. It's there. Like, the goal is to make money for the company, ultimately, not to simply provide the artist with a platform to be an artist in residence. But, obviously everybody wants everybody to eat. Nicole, how do you encourage newer acts who are coming in and they just automatically are skeptical of anybody, any executive, anybody on the other side of the table off that?
That's a good question. Well, in this business, you have people who are here for many different reasons. It's lucrative. So you're going to have it's a business. So you're going to have people who are here specifically to benefit financially. And then you have it's art, so you have people who care about the craft, care about the art, and who are passionate. And so that's what you're going to find in this arena. You're going to find the range of all types of folks who have gravitated to this space for different reasons to achieve different things. And ideally, if you're an artist, you're able to, identify the folks who are here for the right reasons and who are here to support your career and see you become successful. Ultimately, success means that you're doing well financially, you're building your audience. And so just business comes into play, it just, that's the conflict, right? Is the commodification of art. It's always going to be that tension. And there's going to be a learning curve between the artists and those who are here to make money, and so ideally, I say, to artists that come here as Stephney said, educated and as informed as possible so that you can make the decisions that are best for you. You're going to be presented with decisions and many options, and a lot will come your way if you're doing if you're good at this, but I would say, it's education, and we are in a time where you have lots of access and you can compare different scenarios and look at different paths and how that's worked out for different artists, and go in with your eyes wide open, and identify, the right sorts of people. We always say you're only as good as your team. So try to build a team that can support what your goals are, and bring in, offset maybe what your strengths aren't. So that's what I say.
Okay. This next question, I would really love everybody to answer if you have an answer. We're all people who are concerned and passionate about, again, the preservation part of the culture and the historic part of the culture, obviously, which is why we're here. But Prof mentioned context, and that seems to be what gets lost in narrative a lot, even as we see, people reach back to old stories or revisit hip hop history. Sometimes people view things from a current context instead of the context of the day, or they don't know background, or they don't know the behind the scenes stories, especially for those things that happened pre-2000, pre-digital, pre-rise of digital era. So again, with hip hop being pop now, right? What's our responsibility, those of us who've been around for a minute, what's our responsibility in trying to make sure that there's context out there? But then how do we do that? Like, how this anthology is definitely one of the tools, and it was much needed. I'm so sorry, y'all. This anthology is one of the tools and much needed, but how do we make sure context is still there?
I'm gonna jump in, and then I can't wait to hear my colleagues. I'm gonna try to be brief. One thing we have to do is highlight that there are 5 pillars of hip hop. Knowledge is the 5th one, and it gets left out. And so, it's interesting. During my fellowship, I had the pleasure to sit in a Dr. Marcelina Morgan's class that she co-teaches with Ninth Wonder. And so toward the end of the class, we were thinking of, how do we preserve the culture? And for me, one of the ways, it's not the only way, is through higher education and K through 12. And there's people doing programming. There's a gentleman out in Houston that's teaching, I think, middle schoolers the substance and lessons. There's we're inching towards 10 minor certificate programs. UCF, one of them, Arizona, McNally, in Minnesota has a program, Bowie State. So what I'm getting at is knowledge wrapped around the other 4 pillars of hip hop culture and just the context of what it's come from. I mean, 2 turntables and a microphone to where it's at. And another thing that gets left out is the globalization. And so both USA, overseas, and vice versa, and just what does hip hop mean beyond our borders? And so I think that's some of my thought with the context is, well, how do we celebrate genius and Black and brown genius?
Mm-hmm. Who else wants to jump in? Don't everybody go at once.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, I agree everything with the doctor is saying, and also I think it has to really be this, in an ideal sense, like a reimagining of education in the schools that relates to the arts and the studies of histories and stuff like that. Because again, you go back to this thing of reference and context, and we live in this, overly saturated image-driven society where, especially with the young people, so much stuff is being pushed at them that they don't have the tools at the moment, or some of them don't, to understand the reference and context to what they are watching. And, maybe also too, it has to maybe come from maybe the artists who have the bigger platforms. I mean, it'd be interesting if some of these artists started, kicking verses and rhymes about stuff that's more educational mixed in with a good beat. I mean, to me, that was always funny. You had these questionable songs from, back in the day, but what if you had put positive affirming rhymes to these beats, and if you played it enough, it may sink in. I mean, because we're talking about the airwaves, and a lot of this, reminds me of psychological operations. If you send out enough of a frequency or a message in a repetitive, rhythmic way, it might take hold in people's minds. And I think, it might be a re-examining of the delivery systems of how this information is, pushed out there to people.
Thanks for that. Bill, what about you? As somebody who's, again, been there for so much of this.
Naima, you can no, I was about to say, you can just, yeah, look, I think great things are happening. Prof is an example. What we've done with the anthology, the partnership between the Smithsonian and the museum, the development of the Universal Hip Hop Museum in the Bronx, which is, absolutely incredible. The different programs across the nation. This is all fantastic, and I think that it will provide the necessary foundations for folks to understand, what this culture has meant over the course of the past few decades. But got to put a but in. We can't get to the point where we're so self-reverential that we don't even think about the other Black musics that came before and contemplate that maybe there are other forms of Black music or music in general that could come in the future. I'm hoping that hip hop is not the cul-de-sac of historical Black music, that it stops here. I'm watching the verses between Stephanie Mills and Shaka Khan, hearing music that I adore. I mean, passionately. That's not hip hop.
Right.
I adore it. So to the extent that, and this is how, I tend to see hip hop, that it's part of a continuum, not its own thing. When I got into it, so many years ago, it was DJs cutting up Love Is the Message. by MFSB, which is danceable R&B. So
So
yeah,
danceable still, right?
yeah,
now,
it's
today.
throw it on right now at a party, and you'll get me up and a whole bunch of folks.
Right.
So yeah, let's continue to do what we're doing, but that should not stop innovation, new thinking, new ideas, new folks, new contributors to whatever our musical expressions are.
I love that. Thank you. Nicole, we're gonna go. We have some questions from folks watching, but I know that you're gonna have to leave us soon. Are there
Yeah.
any final thoughts you want to share?
Well, I actually was gonna respond to the last question. Yeah, I was gonna say one thing that's been great to see is artists or hip hop artists being able to grow older, age in hip hop, and continue to have careers as hip hop artists. It at a certain point it was considered a young genre, whereas we're seeing artists continue to release music. Right. Or it felt like, well, what are you talking about at a certain point in your life? Whereas now that's opened up, and now you're able to grow in hip hop and talk about what your experience is as, an adult, and that still matters. You have an audience there that, wants to hear that perspective. So I think that um makes a difference, I think, in terms of kind of being able to continue to give context and talk about, artists are talking about how they started off and where things started off. And it's just a continuation of the storytelling. You know what I mean? And I think it's the storytelling that's going to be important. And I think continuing to do that, that's what allows us to continue to provide context, and I think also us telling the stories, us telling our own stories. Now we are as we expand into other spaces, and we launch platforms and podcasts, and we're releasing documentaries and things like that. We're in a position where we're telling our own stories, and we're doing this a lot more now. And I think that's something else that allows us to continue to give context to hip hop.
I
Yeah.
love it. Thank you. And as long if you're still here to chime in on some of these, please feel free. I'm throwing all of these questions out to the panel in general, and again, these are coming from some of the people who are watching. Well, actually, this question is for you specifically, Bill. As an architect of hip hop, this is a direct quote. I think you kind of answered this. How do you see the genre evolving over the next 50 years? And I think you kind of touched on this, so I'll open it up to everybody else too, because I'm going to combine this with another question we have. Hip hop's influence continues to be seen in genres that are outside of hip hop, because again, hip hop is pop. So to Bill's point about hip hop not being a cul-de-sac, do we think we just keep becoming a bigger and bigger genre with more subgenres underneath it? Is there ever a time where hip hop kind of isn't a thing anymore, like a disco or a boogie, or even though I guess boogie still exists technically, we just don't call it that. What do we think it looks like once hip hop hits 100? Which even rock and roll hasn't hit that yet. I don't think, not really, but well, kind of. But what do we think it looks like in another 50 years from now?
Well, I live in the future, so I think that I think hip hop is going to continue to mutate, and it will always be about the heartbeat of hip hop is the beat, and then the spoken word in some way, fashion, or form, and I think it will just be about the evolution of the delivery system. Again, how is that sound going to be heard? And again, it will be up to the artists themselves that are inspired to learn the history, have that reference and context, and then feel, pursue their most authentic self in terms of how they express what they need to say, and this is like hip hop, the music, and the other elements to it, graffiti is going to evolve into, as it is right now, into NFTs and, the breakdancing, as we've seen, you go over to South Korea, Japan. I mean, the incredible artistry of the breakdancers that are overseas. And so, yeah.
Not to interrupt, it's fascinating to me that like breakdancing is bigger globally maybe than ever, but it's not a form we see that often here in the States anymore. Like it still exists. There's still, but we don't even associate it with hip. We barely associate DJs with hip hop anymore. I mean, it's gotten so far away from the origin. Like, wasn't it in the Olympics this past year, or was supposed to be? Maybe?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think, Prof? You're mute, I think. Oh, he's not muted. We can't hear you. I'm gonna come back to you. We can't hear you. Since you moved, we can't hear you. I don't know. Yeah, but it doesn't look like. All right, I will. Oh no, he is. Okay, he was muted. Sorry. All right, try again, Prof. Okay, I'm gonna go to somebody else. Sorry about that. So somebody else asked if, and this again goes to the evolution of hip hop and kind of to what you said, Gabriel, about it being all about the beat and the sound. One person asked about the fact that we go through these cycles where everybody seems to sound like everybody else. So I think we're coming out of an era where everything was a trap beat, or where instead of samples, people were using loops. But it all kind of had that same kind of lo-fi, half chopped and screwed type feel to it. Is hip hop still hip hop? Going back to what we were talking about with the pillars, is hip hop still hip hop without the same level of production and music? And Keith, we have Leslie's screen on, it looks like, on the main screen. Can we take that off? Or is that just me? Okay, sorry. Disregard. Yeah, is hip hop still hip hop if even the actual creation of the sound changes this much? Anyone?
I think, if I can jump in, I think hip hop is still hip hop, depending on who is framing that conversation and what that message is. Because, some aspects of hip hop, obviously back in the day, was like that, as what Chuck D said, was CNN. So it really depends on what is being said and talked about. And then obviously, we live in this society with the business. Do they get behind that to push that out and, commodify that? I mean, I'm sure that would be different with somebody from like from Russia or the Ukraine who, is doing hip hop. I mean, their version of hip hop on some level lyrically would be possibly different, but there might be, common themes. I mean, that was, the beauty of Tupac. I mean, Tupac translated globally to marginalized and indigenous communities who understood the message of struggle and, fighting the powers that be and everything else. So I think it really comes down to, who's framing that conversation.
For me, and I want to answer while Nicole's still here, which was, how do we incorporate more women into corporate levels of hip hop? And Nicole's a GM of a record label. I just wanted to say that. It's a process, and it is something that.
Uh-oh. Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm gonna take that. And I know I actually am gonna be jumping out a little bit early, but I will answer that. Well, it's not, I think what there's an awareness now that there's needs to be more outreach and more support, and more effort made to bring women into into the business side of the industry. And I think that there's more effort to create the pipeline. There's lots of mentorship programs that exist, that are specifically for women in the industry, women who are in it to mentor women who are either in more junior stages of their careers or who aspire to enter the music business. So I think that's one aspect of it. And I think the more of us there are, the more we make the point of bringing others in, hiring through hiring practices and things of that nature. So I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is being intentional, and being aware that we need to have more representation and more of us in it, especially in this space. So yeah. And actually, I do have to jump a little bit early, as we said earlier. So thank you guys all again, and I'm going to head out. Have a great rest of your conversation.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Did y'all want me to answer the question or wherever y'all want to take it? Yeah, I just wanted to say, when she asked about what can we do, what was his name from Houdini, the lead singer that passed away, Ecstasy, made this point. He said, why are we not celebrated the way rock and roll celebrates their heroes, their pioneers, their luminaries? And so one thing I know I've tried to put on the ground, and that's why I appreciate it when Bill and others gave props, is with my platform in higher ed, I partnered with a group down in Miami, hip hop nonprofit, and I had Grandmaster Cash. We got him paid, and he spoke to the students, and many of them being Generation Z for the most part, they didn't know who Grandmaster Cash is, and how his lyrics were mostly used in Rapper's Delight and him and the Cold Crush brothers. So I think we need to do more of that. I'm going to be starting up a hip hop innovators in residence program. I think higher ed needs to step it up, because with master classes, some of the hip hoppers and other folks, actors, celebrities, they could go that direction, but we need to bring them to the classrooms, just like people, great folks like Bill and others are teaching with all that industry knowledge. And so that's one way we can celebrate them, but we need to think of other ways. How do we celebrate them? We passed rock and roll as the most popular music genre in the world. And I think the new hip hop museum coming in New York, and I think Nashville, we need that content celebrated, and we need the actors of the culture to be active.
Yeah, just to the point about women in the culture and industry, I think we always need to be mindful that the foundational entrepreneur of hip hop is a woman by the name of Sylvia Robinson. That none of this happens without Miss Sylvia thinking about taking those three young men who were in New Jersey and putting them in the Sugar Hill studio in Inglewood and recording Rapper's Delight. It starts with her.
That's an
I
exam
also
question on my hip hop class, Bill. Just want you to know that.
So then
Yes,
I passed.
my syllabus.
Is this pass fail?
They better be right.
I also feel I was going to say real quick to add lastly real quick to that. I hope that in the time to come, there is a financial effort to support our pioneer artists. Just like, there was like a jazz musicians home for older jazz musicians, and there's like the actors home. I hope that we can eventually develop something like that for a lot of our hip hop pioneers, so they're not just, regulated to the has been or what have you. Because, we all know that, the making of money in hip hop it varies, and there's a lot of artists that, have contributed, and I just hope that, we continue to learn how to recognize them and compensate them in their later years. Like all the labels, like they need to contribute to like a retirement fund, or something like how the NFL has for its players. Labels need to do something like that.
I think that this was a wonderful session. Leslie, thank you for putting it together. I know, you've been emailing all of us and been honest to make sure that, we could have, a finely tuned presentation. So, thank you to you. I always have to, give thanks to Lonnie Bunch and the folks at the museum, and the folks who helped put together the anthology, Timothy Ann Burnside, Dwan Reese, Mary Mansour, Bashu Getamu. There were incredible folks behind the scenes that put together this mammoth tribute to the culture. And I thank everybody for their efforts, and thank you for including me tonight.
Thank you. Gabriel?
Yeah, I just want to say, thank you again. This book has been like 5-6 year labor of love, and all the people behind the scenes, the ground crew, as and I'm really appreciative to be a part of it, speaking here, and also contributing to the culture in the ways I'm able to. So, and just being on this panel. So thank you. And hip hop will never die. It'll just mutate.
Doc Harrison?
Thank you, Leslie, and everyone, just to be a part of it. I feel like Grant Hill at his first All-Star game. Just want to walk around and get autographs. Just really thankful to be a part of it. And my colleague, Dr. Damian Thomas, at the museum, the sport part, and just your leadership, Leslie. And I just want to leave us with thinking more about intersectionality. As a former college athlete, education, hip hop, and sport was just a part of my peer group's identity. So let's think about how hip hop attaches to other things as well.
And then Naima, if you can close out the program and provide your final thoughts.
Okay. In regards to hip hop culture in general, I'm of two minds. The first is that, as I keep saying, hip hop is pop now. So I recognize that we're in an era of being very protective of Black culture in order to try to undo some of I hate to say damage, but for lack of a better word, I'm going to say damage that was done to culture, to various aspects of our culture. This isn't even just about hip hop. This is just about Black things in general. That's been done over the years because we were open to embracing like a wider appreciation, a wider gaze, which ended up with elements of our culture being taken and appropriated, etc. So I understand that we are all very protective of our stuff right now. But again, hip hop's pop. Pop means that it is popular music. Pop means that it is general, really. And I'm not saying hip hop is general, but it means that most people like this music. And hip hop started as a counterculture, and we are now the culture. So I think that as the culture turns 50, we kind of do have to embrace that. Yeah, it's evolved, it's changed, it's widened. But I think what we have to catch up with in our mentality, and what the business has to catch up with, the Grammys, the labels, the everything, is that hip hop is now old enough and broad enough that it's not just a voice of youth anymore. You know, hip hop heads are in their 60s and up. There should not have been a year where Tribe Called Quest was in the same Grammy category as Migos. You know, like they're not the same. And we need to start recognizing that hip hop has spans and breadth. And that means that there is room for more people, or for some kid who just uploaded a song that we think is trash, but somebody likes, in their bedroom in wherever USA. There's room for that because somebody wants that, right? But that doesn't mean that we're pushing out, obviously, the Nas's, the J's, the those who had their rhyme books and battled and stuff that some of these newer acts don't do. So I think we need to broaden our idea of what hip hop is, even in our attempts to protect it. But that said, we do need to make sure that there's context, however we can, and be gentle in sharing it, because not everybody knows, and that'll make people more receptive, and be cognizant of how we represent it moving forward. I think that hip hop is one of the greatest things to happen to any culture, period. It's amazing the creative arcs that it's taken, in business and in music, and how it seeped into every aspect of our life. But yeah, we got to be willing to give a little bit of it away, but there are still ways that we can hold on to it and protect it, and make sure people know what it was meant to be. I do also want to say to my fellow Gen Xers, we can't act like things that we don't like now, like it's the first time rap was ever trash. Like we can't act like that. Like there's always been silly rappers, silly hip hop, gags, and what, like the 80s, the 90s were full of it. I mean, shoot, Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight is not like a lyrical, it's not super deep. It's very simple. It's spaghetti that tastes like wood. Like that's a lyric, So I'm just saying, let's be mindful of the comparisons that we're making, and really be honest with ourselves, and not be revisionist in our own history.
Shout out to the Mad Rapper.
Yes, shout out to the matter. I got John Blaze. Got more John Blaze.
And the rapping Dalmatians and Brown Sugar.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, listen, we've had some craziness. So, I mean, Leslie, if you want me to actually give the benediction, so to speak, I'll do that too. I was waiting for you to come back, but I'll say it. So yeah, I want to thank all of our panelists, and Leslie, if you did this already, I'm sorry. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here, and I hope that you guys who've been watching at home have enjoyed the conversation. I've enjoyed this conversation. I kind of want to keep some aspects of this going, like 100%. And I think that's the other important thing to do. Like, if we want to preserve hip hop, we have to keep dialogue going. We have to talk about it, because that's how culture endures, right? It's through passing things down. So we have to have a conversation that's not just like, who do you want to see battle in the verses, but that's really about the different aspects of music, and who you like and who you didn't, and why, and what you appreciate and what you don't, and skills and talents, and all of that. There's room for that. But this was a great one. And if you don't know these people who are on the stage, please follow them. I want to thank Leslie. I want to thank the museum for this incredible work, which is the anthology. If you don't have it, please go get it. Buy it for somebody for Christmas, or ask for it for Christmas. Perfect time of year. Which was a labor, 7 years, Leslie, to put this together. I think so. He might be frozen. 7 years to put this together. That's a lot of work. Bill, you were on the committee, right? Bill, 7 years?
Yeah, 7 years.
7 years. That's a long time. That's a long time. I came in at the very end before they went to print to write my little essay. 7 years. That's a long time. So anyway, yeah, it's a worthy look. It's a first of its kind collection of history and context. We love context. of how hip hop has mirrored the shaping of America and the culture of the world. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to say goodnight. I think Leslie may have frozen. So Keith, you may have to close us out.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening. And I just want to thank all of our panelists, our wonderful moderator, for such an insightful discussion. I've been monitoring the chat, and it seems like you all enjoyed this discussion. If you'd like to learn more, be sure to check out the museum's website to purchase your copy of the Smithsonian Anthology of Hip Hop and Rap. With that said, thank you, good night, happy holidays.
You too. Take care.
Good night. Thank you, Leslie.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.